Well, thank you very much, Craig. Who says economics has to be boring? Now, we've actually got some time for some questions from the floor. I'd actually like to kick it off with a question. You mentioned that CBA's forecast for the Australian dollar for 2012 sits around $1.05 to $1.10. What about, say, the next 10 to 20 years and what that means for the restructuring we're seeing across Australia?
There isn't going to be a lot of relief. We're looking for a long term. We're factoring in something like 85 to 90 cents for the Aussie dollar going forward. The long-term average for the Aussie dollar is around about 72, 73 cents. We don't think it's going to get to those sorts of levels. And I told you the answer to every economic question is China. That's a key reason for it. I think one of the things we underestimate here in Australia is that eventually we're going to have the supply of resources that we produce is going to meet the level of demand. China doesn't have that expectation. China's worried that the rest of the world won't be able to supply all the resources it needs. So we think that the longer term situation, China, India, Asia generally, is going to continue to provide strong demand for Australian resources, and that's keep our currency high. 85, 90 cents, it could be even higher than that, depending on how the situation plays out in China. And that means we do have to readjust our views about what sort of strategy we need to be employing, whether you're a retailer, whether you're a manufacturer. A lot of people say manufacturing is in decline, we're going to go out backwards. But I was in Wollongong, where BlueScope Steel is. Now, you know BlueScope Steel is exiting from Wollongong, closing down some of its operations. Manufacturers there aren't despondent, they're banded together in an industry group and they're getting presentations from Boeing, from Rio Tinto. This week they got it from the LNG plant in Darwin, and they're saying we want local suppliers. And they've got small manufacturers banding together with one another, tendering for projects, because why? Here in Australia there is a crying need for good quality manufacturing type operations. And sometimes it's the case that the manufacturers need to get together as an area of strength to be able to tap into those opportunities.
Any questions from the floor? There's a roving mic.
And there's no one. If you've got any questions on banking policy, we've got our banking people here.
Craig, Ron Ward. What's your view about the federal government's enthusiasm for getting the budget back into the black?
Well, you do like to see enthusiasm. You've got to encourage enthusiasm. As to whether they have to get budget in surplus by a certain date and time, that's by no means the case. The fact that they have got a determination to keep their budget in order, to be able to cut out spending, to be able to grow revenues is very, very important. And that is very important in terms of when we're thinking about budgets. It's not all about cutting your expenses. It's not about focused on that. Because we know in any business, you can cut out all your expenses, you can cut all your staff out, but at the end of the day, you're not going to grow your revenues. So you're going to be back in the worst situation. You need to be growing revenues at the same time as you're maintaining discipline in terms of spending. Certainly that's something I encourage, Tasmanian Treasury to think outside the square about growing revenues and getting some more people coming into Tasmania and creating momentum. In terms of the federal government, certainly you understand where Labor is coming from. Labor is still working with this proposition that they're not going to record a budget surplus under their watch. They'd love to be able to chalk up one, be able to say, okay, we've done it. Unfortunately, they came into power and guess what? The global financial crisis came and they had to basically support our economy. So unfortunately, circumstances took over, but the fact that our budget is in reasonable shape compared with the rest of the world, our debt is low, is very, very encouraging. They shouldn't be too quick to be able to get back in surplus. They've got to take into case the considerations about what's happening in the environment. And certainly the latest move in terms of the healthcare rebate, I think, is very much a negative step rather than a positive step.
Question down the front.
Craig, John Pitt from Pitt and Sherry. how would you describe the mainland perception of Tasmania as a place to invest? And from your perspective, if we wanted to change some of our indicators around, what would be the key things that we could do to do that?
In terms of perceptions, I think the general perception is that the standard of living is reasonably high because you don't have the problems in terms of traffic congestion. You do have, the advantage of, great, environment, pristine environment. You do have the advantage of great produce, here in Tasmania as well. Low cost of housing, so you've got plenty of advantages. I suppose for a lot in the mainland, it's still the tyranny of distance though. It's the fact that you're having to live a little bit, further south. It's also the fact that perhaps the airlines could up their services a little bit more to be able to make it a little bit more attractive and to come into places like Tasmania. It's the same sort of thing with the Pilbara in Western Australia. There's plenty of advantages and opportunities there, but if you've got people in the western suburbs of Sydney chafing the bit to get over there, they're saying, well, it's all a little bit too far. I think it's a case of any sort of region has got to be highlighting its virtues, and the virtues here in Tasmania is great produce, is great, standard of living. I'd love to see, the state government set up a marketing campaign, whether it's across Australia or across the world, and identifying where the areas of job opportunities are and it's not being met locally, and bringing the people in, and saying, you should come in and we'll provide some incentives for you to come in. We've got the workforce. Guess what? You've got to feed these people. You've got to clothe these people. You've got to, put housing for these people. To the Asia region, huge opportunities in the Asia region because in terms of a marketing destination, in terms of a tourist destination, coming to a place like Tasmania, you've got few equals in the world in terms of the attractions which are on offer, particularly from areas like Asia which haven't seen that sort of environment, and they're the ones with money. So I think there's great opportunities. I think you just don't know how good you've got it here in Tasmania until you travel to other parts of the world, and then you start to realise what you've got.
And one last question.
Mark Kelleher, Department of Economic Development, Tourism and the Arts. I guess there's been a lot of discussion in the media over the recent times about the underlying lack of productivity performance in the Australian economy. I guess China's to blame for that. How will China help us address that, and where would be the areas, or is it Portugal and Greece?
To some extent, China is the answer to that question. Because it is the fact that what we've seen in recent times is strong demand for our goods and services here in Australia, particularly in the mining areas. And the way that we've met that demand is put more labour on. So, well, that's the simple solution. It's hard to be able to train people up. It's hard to be able to train the existing staff. Just put workers in place. Now, they're not going to be super productive from day one. It's going to take time for them to go through. What we're seeing at the moment is we're seeing job opportunities starting to flatten out. So we're not seeing the same sort of employment growth. But the people that got jobs over the last couple of years, now they're being trained up and they're becoming more efficient. And I think you'll be surprised over the next couple of years how much productivity improves. Because the areas of productivity has been very weak, there's been areas like mining and the utilities like electricity, gas and water. Other areas have actually been okay. So it's been the areas where they've had huge employment gains where the productivity has been poor. And I don't think we should be too fussed about that. Businesses have got to continue to focus on their business and make sure most efficient and getting as much as possible out of their people. And I think most businesses are doing that. The banks are certainly doing that. Some banks more than others. But it is a case that I think we are going to see an improvement in productivity over time.
Could I have a round of applause for ComSec's Craig Davis? So we've had a fantastic, insightful and entertaining overview of what's happening in the global and Australian economy. But what might this mean for the Tasmanian economy? Well, there's a very quick snapshot. Over the past 12 months, we've seen about 1.5% real growth in the Tasmanian economy. Private investment is up 5.9% over the past year, but household consumption driving along at about 1.1%. And dwelling approvals is one area which is critically low, the lowest it's been in 10 years. Now, to inspire and to drive the Tasmanian recovery, we've seen from policymakers and our political leaders a range of economic visions and plans. Now, from both the government and the opposition, these are surprisingly similar. We have on the one hand 17 focus sectors, on the other 5 pillars. They all talk about industries like food, tourism and IT. We've even had one report from an organisation that tells us that a debt-funded expansion of the public sector is the way to future prosperity. But industries that don't feature heavily in any of these visions include finance and insurance, health and human services, retail trade and logistics. But the common theme to all of these visions is the idea that the strength and success of one set of industries depends on the strength and success of others. But there's a chicken and egg problem here. And as Gary Banks, from the chairman of the Productivity Commission, warned, a trap into which the proponents of selective industry support often fall is the superficial appeal of multipliers, the seeming science by which investment ripples are transformed into tidal waves of economic activity. In reality, the science of multipliers is the economics of the free lunch. And for those of you that are having a free lunch today, just be assured that someone else is paying for it. So the really important question then becomes not what industries are going to drive Tasmania's future prosperity, but what is the right and proper role for government and what is the right and proper role for Tasmania's 38,000 businesses who are each applying their own economic visions and who are rightly bearing the potential risks and rewards of those visions. You could legitimately argue, as the TCCI does, that growth of a whole variety of industries, wealth-generating industries, depend on the following: a flexible regulatory approach to land and other natural resources, a highly skilled and mobile labour force, and a dynamic and competitive financial services sector to intermediate between savers and lenders, such as our friends the Commonwealth Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll wrap up now. We're now going to have a 15-minute break. I'd ask you to return to your seats at 12:30 when entree will be served, and then the Premier will be joining us at 1 o'clock. Thank you.